Antichrist.
In fear of his life, Clement fled to the safety of the Castel Sant'Angelo. And his fears were justified. For the next day, Rome was torn apart without mercy.
They break in and they ravage the city. They rape, they hold people to ransom, they destroy buildings, they violate sacred buildings, and they keep Clement VII caged into his Castel Sant'Angelo.
About 8,000 people died on the first day. This was just massacre on an absolutely grand scale. Everything was destroyed. Doors were ripped off their hinges, shops were looted, women were raped, people were casually mutilated and tortured. It was absolutely horrific. The sack of Rome is probably one of the blackest moments that takes place in the Renaissance.
After 7 months on the siege, Clement perfected his plan for escape. Changing his robes for rags, he had the papal jewels removed from their settings, and all the gold melted down. With his treasures sewn into his clothes, Clement bribed his way out of Rome and headed for the safety of Florence. But news traveled faster than the Pope. Inspired by reports from Rome, enemies of the Medici in Florence were already running riot.
They attack what symbolizes that regime. And they attack the buildings, which are the embodiments of that authority. So for the Medici supporters in Florence, that week was a week of total blind fury.
The rioters struck without discrimination. It was a bench hurled from City Hall that did the damage to Michelangelo's David, the city's greatest symbol, all in defiance of the Medici. In the wake of the chaos, Pope Clement VII stood poised to attack Florence. Trapped inside the church of San Lorenzo, Michelangelo cowered beneath the tombs he had built for the Medici cousins.
I hid in a tiny cell, entombed like the dead Medici above, though hiding from a live one.
But the beleaguered city held one trump card. Captive inside Florence was the last legitimate heir to the Medici line. Clement VII's niece was 11 years old. Her name was Catherine de' Medici. Clement famously called her "my pearl beyond price," But he knew precisely what she was worth to the Medici family. Unfortunately for him, so did the people of Florence. They threatened to throw Catherine into a soldier's brothel unless Clement agreed to a truce. And Clement called off his troops, for he had plans for Catherine de' Medici. Clement soon capitalized on Catherine's survival. Within a few years, he married her off to the son of the French king. She was only 14. The unrest which her uncles had unleashed now traveled with her. Under the reign of Queen Catherine de' Medici, religious hate would soon infect France as well. Back in Rome, Clement VII was now living on borrowed time. Desperate to make one last grand gesture, he summoned the man he'd grown up with, Michelangelo. A massive fresco inside the Vatican would mark the completion of Michelangelo's work for the Medici popes. But it would also reflect his mood towards his patrons. Over the altar of the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo chose to portray the Last Judgment. The magnificent fresco was a product of the agonies of its time.
This is one of the most tragic period for the history of Europe. So art could not be anymore a mere representation of natural beauty as it had been in the Renaissance because of the dramatic events which were typical of that time period. The Last Judgment commissioned to Michelangelo probably expresses a lot of this feeling of oppression and anxiety which was typical of the time. Those are not happy people. You see whose bodies are twisted and suffering, and you cannot paint people who are happy and serene and smiling with beautiful landscapes in the background. It's like the transition from Impressionism to Expressionism. Impressionism is serenity, flowers, beauty, bucolic nature. Expressionism is dramatic. Expressionism is unbearably violent as an art.
But Clement VII would not live to see the great work finished. In 1534, exhausted by the turmoil of his reign, Giulio de' Medici died. It was the end of an era. The corrupt, disastrous reign of the Medici popes was over. But a single act of redemption would herald a magnificent new era for the Medici dynasty. Future generations would take the Renaissance beyond the realm of art and sculpture and change man's understanding of the universe forever.